I'm Charles Hartgrove, and I'm the Associate Director of the Virginia Institute of Government. We're part of the Weldon Cooper Center for Public Service at the University of Virginia. And our goal is to help communities build governance capacity and build local government leaders across the Commonwealth and beyond. So this video is part of a continued series of discussions about topics important to communities and local governments. Our goal is to showcase public sector related issues involving innovation and regional collaboration and the people that are leading those efforts. I'm honored to be with two community leaders from far Southwest Virginia today. Ron and Jill Carson live in the town of Pennington Gap in Lee County. They are the founders of the Appalachian African American Cultural Center, which was founded in 1987 and is in the original African American school that was created to serve the Black children of Lee County during segregation. Mr. Carson's great-great-grandmother, Rachel Scott, donated the land and the building for the school. While both of you have served your community in many ways, I would be remiss not to mention that Jill serves as the vice mayor on the Pennington Gap Town Council. And it's because of that connection that I was able to meet both of you at a Virginia Municipal League conference some time ago. So first, thank you both for taking the time to be with me today.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. So let's start out with Ron and Jill. Ron, I know you're a Lee County native, and Jill, you had to travel a bit to get to Lee County from where you grew up, didn't you? So why don't you tell us about yourselves?
Well, everybody seems to refer to me as a Yankee. Was born in Connecticut, lived most of my life in Boston, and met Ron in Boston, and in 1986, he brought me here to Pennington Gap, and I've been here ever since. And Ron can tell you about himself.
I was born and raised here in Pennington Gap. I went to school here in Pennington Gap. I left at a very young age when I finished high school in 1971, and I moved to Boston and met Jill in 1974, I think, 75, and we got married, and we've moved back here to Pennington Gap.
Outstanding. Well, just a note for folks as well. I'm a native of far Southwest Virginia, and my mom is actually from the Ben-Hur community in Lee County. So this means quite a bit to me as well to talk to folks from back home. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Jill, when and why did you decide to run for town council?
Oh, gee, I had to really think on that. The bigger question being why, I guess. But if I recall, I think it was about 2012 that I was asked to serve on the newly created Pennington Gap IDA. One of the then council members had decided that it made sense for Pennington Gap to create their own IDA, and from what I understand, it was to allow Pennington to have more leeway in terms of economic development, bringing business in, as opposed to going through the county. So not knowing a whole lot about that, I agreed to do that. So I joined the IDA, and through some of the business transactions that were going on through IDA, their problem was created, and some of the work that was being done between the IDA and the town council. And that led to a disagreement and not being able to come to a meeting of the minds in that situation. And it was then that I felt, well, gee, maybe it would make sense for me to think about running, because that was then an election year, and I believe that was 2014. And I thought that maybe I could make a change, make a difference if I sat on the council. So I stepped out there and ran for town council, and surprisingly enough, got elected, got the second highest number of votes, believe it or not, and have been served. Well, I'm in my second year of my second term right now on the council. And just a little background on the council: I'm the only female that sits on the council, and as you mentioned, Charles, I'm the vice mayor today, and I'm the only person of color that sits on the council. And I believe it was in 2014 maybe, that I was asked to serve on the executive committee of Virginia Municipal League, which I do today. And so that's how I got there. That's what I do. I never expected to be involved in local government like this, but I am. It's a challenge, and it's a challenge I really enjoy.
I appreciate that, and thanks for taking time for that service. That's important. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going on in the town today, some of the things that you're proud of and things you guys are working on?
Well, we've had a lot of things that we were really knee deep in until the virus came. So when I look at what we're doing today and what we're doing 5 months ago, they're pretty different. But one of the things that we're really proud of, and that is the restoration of our theater here in Pennington. And when you talk to Ron, he can tell you what that used to look like when he was a young person growing up in the town of Pennington Gap. But, and this was prior to my getting on council, but funds were required to allow the town to restore the theater. I can sit here today and say that that was probably one of the best things that happened in Pennington. A lot of people, I guess, were not really excited about that venture, but I would say that the theater has turned out to be the catalyst for our growth and the growth of our businesses in the community, because it has drawn a lot of people into the town of Pennington. A lot of the skeptics today will tell you that they've really changed their minds about the theater. We work closely with Pro Arts. We work closely with the Barter Theater, with our school systems, our local businesses and restaurants. We'll talk about how it helped them, it improved on their businesses. People that work in the restaurants have talked about how their tips have gone sky high as a result of it. And again, it has served as a catalyst for much of what has happened. We have a park, the name of it is, well, it's called Lehman Field, and I guess it's been around forever. You probably remember Lehman Field, Charles, and the town has invested a lot into Lehman Field, and people come from miles around to go to that park. We have an ATV trail, we have an RV park, so people that come in to enjoy those kinds of activities also go to the theater. So it has really served as a catalyst for us, much of the economic development, in the town of Pennington. Since the virus, I think it's fair to say that Pennington Gap has taken the lead in terms of advising the community, getting the community up to date, keeping the community up to date on what's going on with that. And from the very onset, we contacted the health department and were put in touch with Dr. Sue Cantrell, and she's with she's over the health department for Lenawisco and Lenawisco Planning District. And we had her on our local radio show. Now we have our local radio station broadcasts from the theater every Monday morning with updates to the community. Dr. Cantrell participates in that as she can and gives us updates and keeps us informed of what's going on with COVID and the changes as the governor passes them down. We've worked closely with the county and actually been able to keep the county abreast of what's going on with COVID. We've been talking about the CARES Act funds that have come to our communities to allow us to use that money to help us through the situation. We've used some of that money to give out masks and hand sanitizers to all of our businesses in the town of Pennington. All of our council members, all of us have received laptops so that we can meet virtually. We have our council meetings virtually. We've redone our office. We've put in all kinds of safety mechanisms within our offices to protect our employees. We were allowed to get computers for our employees, some of our employees to work from home. So all of that money has been really helpful to us and to the community, and we look for other ways in which to use it. We're actually in negotiations right now with our court system. And I think all of us, well, for us, I can't say all of us, but our judges are looking for a means by which to hold any trials that they may have and hold them, you know, safely. Our courthouse does not have the space to allow for social distancing and that kind of thing. So how can we help them through that? And again, here comes the theater, where we do have the space, and perhaps that could be a way for which to help them, and that CARES Act money would help us do that. Aside from the virus, we did have in place, and this is a big project that we're talking about, and we will resume it, and that is a barriers-free playground for children with disabilities, and not just restricted to children with disabilities, but for everyone to use, but specifically for the use of children who are limited. And so we've been working on raising money for that. We organized about 2 years ago a group that's called the Pennington Partners, and this was in response to our not having an active chamber of commerce here in Lee County. So we thought about what can we do to fill that gap. And working with some folks from Virginia Tech, we came up with the idea of organizing a community group, which we have coined Pennington Partners. And they work with us in Pennington and help us fulfill some of the events that we would like to see happen. They get involved in cleaning projects throughout the town. They've gotten grant money to install cigarette receptacles throughout the town. They've actually hosted a triathlon last summer, which we had hoped we could do this year, but again, because of the virus, we weren't able to. So they've been very active in what they can do to help support us. And as part of that fundraising activity for the park, they've donated funds from last year's triathlon toward that goal. So that Pennington Partners is something that we're really proud of. And we just recently installed our Virginia Love sign, and we're proud of that. We got grant money to do that. So we continue to move forward. We hopefully will find ourselves in a situation where our small businesses will be able to survive this. We are working with DHCD with grant money that we've applied for, where perhaps we can help some of our businesses make it through this. And we did get a grant also that will allow us to set up stations for businesses, well, people who are looking to get their businesses off the ground. And we would be able to provide them space for training and that kind of, it's just like a small business incubator kind of situation. So we did get funding for that. So we have a lot of things that are out there. We see Pennington as being really progressive. We're proud of the headway that we're making. We're proud of our town manager. We work on, Keith, and he's done a fine job of making things happen, and we hope that, you know, we'll just continue to do this as best we can through the virus.
No, I appreciate that. I know a lot of the members of the Institute of Government are struggling, just as Pennington Gap has, on how to adapt with everything with the coronavirus and COVID-19. So I appreciate you sharing what you guys have been doing to try to help that, and also appreciate the importance of the investment you all made in your downtown with the theater. I think that's proven time and time again, but reinvesting in downtowns is very important for towns and cities throughout the Commonwealth. So let's talk a little bit about the Appalachian African American Cultural Center and how that came to be, and the challenges that you both overcome building it from the ground up over the years.
Sure. The Culture Center is the former little one-room school that my great-great-grandmother, Rachel Scott, saw the need that the Black children needed a better building to attend. The school was built in 1939. My mom was the first group in that building in 1939, and I was the last group in 1965 when we integrated. I like to tell stories about our teacher. We had one teacher that taught 7 different grades, actually 8 different grades, starting at primer up to the 7th grade. And it served as the only source of education for the Black children here in the Pennington area. I tell stories about we didn't have playground equipment. Our parents would take old socks and roll them up into balls and sew them into balls. And we would take broom handles and mop handles and play softball out in the yard. But one thing that comes to my mind is that we used to walk by the white school, which was the Pennington Elementary School, at the bottom of the hill where we lived, to get to the little one-room school. And we would always see the white children out there playing on the playground equipment, and we wondered, well, why can't we have the same thing? We didn't have a cafeteria. It was just a little one-room school. Our parents would make us a brown bag every morning, a sandwich, apple, or an orange, and they would give us a nickel. And the nickel was for the milk. We had a milkman that came every morning around 9:30, and the white milk was 2 cents, and the chocolate milk was 3 cents. And we would drink our white milk with our lunch every day, then our chocolate milk would be in the afternoon recess. We didn't have a high school here at the time, so when you finished the 7th grade, there was a little bitty bus that took the older kids up to Big Stone Gap to Bland High School. Bland was the closest Black high school in the area at the time. So the first 7 years of my education was out this little one-room school building that is the Appalachian African American Culture Center today. And it always had a special place in my heart. And when I moved away, now, if you think about it, when I moved away, there was still some segregation going on in the higher education institutions in this area. So I really couldn't get into a decent school. So I went to Boston, where I had an aunt living. And I stayed in Boston for the next, I guess, 18 to 20 years, and where I met my wife, Jill. And we decided that we wanted to come back to Southwest Virginia in the mid-'80s. And ironically, when we came back, the Lee County school system was beginning to consolidate schools. They were building a new high school, Lee High School. So the little one-room school that I attended all those years, after integration, it became a Head Start center, and for many, many, many years. Now, my great-great-grandmother built the building, but the Lee County school system actually took over the building after integration. So we found out when we moved here in 1986, during the school consolidation in the building of the Lee High School, is that the little one-room school was going to be torn down, or it was going to be sold to the highest bidder. All around this little one-room school, you know, we own the property. Right across where the school is where we built our home. And to the left and right, we have, you know, other lots that belong to the family. So this little one-room school was sitting right in the middle of our property. So make a long story short, there was a lot of battles that we had to do to retain the school. And I will let Jill talk a little bit about the battles, because I found them to be emotionally draining when I talk about them. So Jill, you can tell them about the battles that we had in retaining the school.
Well, as Ron mentioned, the school building obviously meant a lot to him, to his family members, and to other young Black folks that went to school there. And every time that Ron brought me here before we moved, when we came to visit, he would bring me to this building and he would reminisce about the building, how important it was. And the other people did the same thing. So when the school system started dragging their feet about, you know, what they were going to do with the building, the overall status. And let me mention that the reason why the ownership, if you will, rested in their hands was because there was no reversion clause in the deed that said once this building stopped operating as a school, then it would revert back to the family. So that presented the problem. So they had no intention of turning that building over. I contacted the nearest chapter of NAACP, told them about the plight, and that chapter happened to be in Bristol, Virginia, told them about our plight, and they met with us and were more than willing to work with us. And as Ron said, it was not an easy thing for us to go through. We had to take it to court. We had to ultimately just shame them into turning the building back over to the community. And when they did that, they just agreed to turning the building back but without the property, which she said, you know, explained belonged to his great-great-grandmother as well. So there were actually two battles that we had to go through for both the building as well as the property. When we ultimately got the building, we didn't know what we wanted to do with it. So, you know, so we were fortunate, Ron and I were fortunate enough to get a fellowship to the Highlander Research and Education Center located in Newmarket, Tennessee. And it was actually the Southern Appalachian Leadership Training Program that we were fortunate enough to participate in. And it was through that experience that we got the idea of turning it into what it is today, the Appalachian African American Cultural Center. But it was because we learned there that very little, if anything, had ever been written about the experience of African Americans in the Central Appalachian region.
Pretty much the coalfield counties of Southwest Virginia and Eastern Kentucky, Southern West Virginia, and parts of Northeast Tennessee. Very little has been written, so that sparked our interest. I can remember going to a Black History program during Black History Month in February up at the old Clinch Valley College, which is now University of Virginia College at Wise. And I saw a quote by Dr. Carter G. Woodson, and that quote has just resonated in my head for all these years. And I'm gonna paraphrase him. He said, perhaps the most important element to any given people is the documentation and preservation of their history. If a race has no history, it has no worthwhile tradition, and it stands to be lost in the eyes of society forever. So seeing that and not really knowing the history of Lee County, Wise County, Scott County, Dickinson County, Russell County, Tazewell County, it just gave me the incentive to try to learn more about this particular region. But as we started to reaching out to these different counties, you know, we saw the interest, like I said, in southern West Virginia, that borders Southwest Virginia. The same in Eastern Kentucky, Harlan, Lynch, Benham. So it was pretty much the same experience all around. And one thing I do want to mention is that, you know, we are not a museum, and we have never been a museum. We do have some memorabilia, some artifacts in the building, but we are a education and research center where we document stories of African Americans throughout this area and region.
And one thing that we didn't mention, Charles, is the demographics of this area. I think it's important for people to understand. Back in 1986, when we came to live here, the population, overall population for Lee County was around 25,000 in the county. And of that, less than 1% Blacks. And it remains that way, if not fewer. If one were to look online or check the census, those numbers would look very different. And that is because we have a federal penitentiary here, and those numbers are also, they kind of skew the, you know, the actual numbers, because that's based on area code. Zip code, I'm sorry. So anyway, we came back from Highlander and met with community. And when we talk about community, we will always be talking about the majority, the basically white community, because there are so few Blacks here. And we had a meeting and at Ron's parents' house and talked about this idea of documenting and preserving the history here at the center. Everybody, you know, supported it, loved the idea. So we hit the ground running because the Black community was an elderly community and we wanted to get the stories while we could. We wanted to make that happen. There was a time, during the time that people carried those big video cameras on their shoulders, and we got everybody that was interested to get out and help us get the stories, and community support was wonderful, So that's how it all began, and we started getting the stories. We got started gathering memorabilia. We worked with, for those who are familiar with the folks from the Apple Shop in Whitesburg, Kentucky, they trained us on how to facilitate story swaps, another means, another avenue of getting the stories. The first event that we had, story swap, was on one-room schools. People came from everywhere because everybody wanted to talk about their one-room schools, Black or white, they wanted to talk. So we got those stories and got them documented. We had a woman, 96-year-old woman, who wanted to facilitate a session on remedies and herbs from the mountains, and she did that. So we got that documented. Then we went to holiday traditions in the mountains. So it just started growing and growing to the point where we weren't able to hold those events at the center because we couldn't accommodate the numbers of people. And we just continued to do that. And then in 1993, we had a fire. And unfortunately, we lost everything in that fire. And one of the things, I say everything, but there was one thing that did survive the fire, and that was, and if you could see it today, that was the program, if you will, from Rachel Scott's funeral. and it's singed at the bottom. You can see the singe.
And the lock of her
And
hair.
a lock of her hair, because back there was very common to do that. When someone died, you kept a lock of their hair, and it survived the fire. So that really gave us the impetus to start all over again.
Well, that's an amazing story. Just the fact that the timing of you guys moving back to Lee County and being able to take advantage of getting back the ownership of the building. I'd like to learn a little bit more about some of the things you mentioned, both of you, talking about the history, the diversity training. I know you also do some workshops on dismantling racism. If you'd like to talk about those things and maybe Unity Day, some other things that have come out of the works that you do, I'd really appreciate that.
Sure. Race Unity Day was introduced to us by a physician and his wife that moved here. Forgot where they came from, but it was Iran, and they were of the Baha'i faith. And they introduced us to Race Unity Day, which the center sponsored for 20 plus years. It was the second Sunday in June. And we started that I think in 1989, and the last one was probably 2014, 2015. But we also do what is called Dismantling Racism workshops. And we actually got this concept from Virginia Organizing Project, VOP. They developed this syllabus that we pulled from. Well, actually, I was trained with VOP. The executive director, Joe Sakos, and I went to Austin, Texas to be trained as facilitators for this Dismantling Racism workshops. We really didn't want to copy VOP. I'm sure they had the copyrights. So our sessions are called anti-racism workshops. And what we do is we create a safe place where people will come in and just talk about race. We have a 1-day workshop and we have a 2.5-day workshop. But a lot of times we just do discussions, afternoon discussions on white privilege, internalized Black oppression, and institutionalized racism. And it's just a way of just talking and being honest with yourself. You know, there are no words off the table. And
this is something that I was sitting here trying to remember how we even got into this, but one of the things that I didn't mention was after moving here, I worked for the school system for 10 years in the Head Start program as their fiscal officer, and then became an organizer, community organizer with, well, then it was called Virginia Organizing Project, and today is known as Virginia Organizing out of Charlottesville. And actually, the first chapter of that organization began in the Cultural Center. And that's where we met this person that Ron mentioned, Joe Sakos. And Joe had been instrumental in organizing what's known as Kentuckians for the Commonwealth. And the whole idea of this group is to give a voice to the voiceless. And as I mentioned, I became a community organizer with that group. And I think that had much to do with why I got elected to the town council here, because as a community organizer, I met a lot of people, talked to a lot of people, heard what people had to say, heard about any issues that was concerning people in the community. But as Ron said, the whole foundation of this work comes from the workshop that Virginia Organizing had developed. And I think that, and we have used this with many people, many groups throughout the region. I think since the George Floyd situation, it's taken on a whole new picture, a whole new meaning. It has put us in a place where we've been taking another look at the whole concept of the workshop as it existed and how we can perhaps bring it more up to date and think changes that we can make to it. And one of the things I think that really jumped out at us began with the situation in Marion. And I don't know, how familiar you are with that.
I am. And so for our folks who may not be familiar with this, the town of Marion, which is in far southwest Virginia as well, in Smith County, has had some protests and marches as well. And unfortunately, one of the young gentlemen who's one of the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement in Marion found a burning cross in his front yard. And now that's been under investigation. I know that the federal government's been involved, but that's the incident I think that Jill is talking about. So.
Well, and when that unfortunate situation happened, Ron and I were contacted. Well, it involved a person by the name of Ken Heath. That I'm not even sure what Ken's title is, but he's very actively involved in the town of Marion. And the police chief contacting us about the situation in Marion and asking if there was anything that Ron and I could do. What jumped out at us immediately was the fact that they had to reach so far, because we're like maybe 2 hours from Marion. Why are they having to come to us? And the young man that Charles has referred to, his name is Trayvon Brown, and he lives with his mom, and he's 17 years old, and they had a cross burned in their yard. We were put into contact with a young man older than Trayvon, who was involved with a group called the New Panther Initiative. They, for some who may or may not be familiar, they were involved in a situation in Johnson City, Tennessee, which is right across the road here, at a pawn shop where a number of people in that group, made up of Blacks and whites, very diverse group, had gone into a pawn shop trying to buy guns. The young man, Trayvon Brown, had organized what he called a protest march scheduled for a certain date in Marion. These folks are going to go up in support of Trayvon in this march. We were put into contact with the young man that was leading this group and try to find out from him what he hoped to accomplish by going to Marion. And he wasn't too receptive to us. And we had to recognize the fact that we had age difference there too. We had to take that into account.
Generation gap.
A generation gap.
Yeah.
And taking that into account and really weren't making much headway with him. He then agreed to put us into contact with Trayvon. Let Trayvon tell you what he wants. So we got in touch with Trayvon, talked to him. Nice young man who said, I just want to be able to live in peace with my mother. I'm 17 years old. I just want fairness and equity. I want to be able to go to school and get a good education. He had a laundry list of what he wanted. He says, that's all that I'm looking for. I don't want any trouble. I don't want any violence, and he was very, very clear about that. And so that began our relationship with him. And in talking to Ken, he and the police chief from Marion, John Clare is his name, they were seeing where these other groups were coming in, and I can only refer to them as supremacist groups because that's exactly what they were. We're planning some kind of a protest march as well on the same day. Their march was scheduled for 1 o'clock that day, and Trayvon's march was scheduled for 2. They were asking us if we could get Trayvon to change the time of his protest, which would allow them more time and would hopefully get some of the groups from the 1 o'clock, people from the 1 o'clock group to disseminate. So that, as well as to talk to Trayvon about the plan for his march to try to shorten the distance. So they thought if we could make those 2 things happen, have the time change, shorten the distance, then they would be able to control the situation. And you must understand the fact that there was a cross-burning made this a hate crime. So the FBI was on board. They had snipers on the rooftops. I mean, this was making for a very, very volatile situation. And again, Trayvon didn't know us, but he did listen to us. So long story short, we were able to, meet the needs as presented to us to help, to give them a better way to control the situation. And long story short, it went off, it was uneventful. There were no arrests. There was no violence. So that worked out well. And it was from that we started asking ourselves, why is it that they had to reach so far? And there were other events that were being scheduled in Elizabethton, Tennessee, not far from here, as well as Rogersville, that is not far from here, being primarily led by the folks from the new Panther Initiative group. And these 2 have small Black communities, elderly Black communities. Again, what was to be gained from that kind of approach? And we started looking at our packet, our anti-racism packet, or our dismantling racism packet, which had really focused on white privilege. We have a woman that works with us in doing these workshops, and she's white. She focuses on white privilege, that piece. We focus on the anti-racist oppression piece. And but we started looking at the oppression piece. And we began to realize that this really needed our attention. That the mere fact that they weren't able, and this is what they told us in Marion, they weren't able to find any Black leaders in Marion through the churches or otherwise. And then further examination showed that same thing existed with Elizabethton and all those small Black communities around us, a lack of Black leadership. So that then led us to really, really talk about refocusing this workshop. One thing that we didn't mention was that shortly after the George Floyd situation, candlelight vigil was held in Big Stone Gap in Wise County in response to that, and one was also held here in response to that, here in Pennington. And unfortunately, what we saw was that Black people that attended did not, some, not all, but way too many stood on the periphery of the group. They did not come into the group. They sat in their cars. They didn't come into the group. Same kind of thing happened here with some of the Blacks. So why is that happening? Is this what we're talking about when we talk about institutionalized racist oppression? So we started thinking about that and how things played out in the Black community. We go back to the cultural center and our experience and building on that. And we found with the Black community here, they stepped away from that as well. and it took us a long time to realize, particularly me, coming from Boston, took a while for me to realize and understand that the reason why we weren't getting the support from the Black community was because it was too hard. They did not want to revisit those days when they were going to that one-room school and the racism that they had experienced during that time. And actually, in having conversation with them later on, they were asking, why would you want to do that? We don't want to revisit that. And so I think that has much to do with this oppression that we're talking about, and how do we get past that? How do we deal with that? But we feel very strongly, and I think I can speak for Ron on this, is that that's something that we're going to have to resolve as a people and as a community before we can even begin to address some of those other systemic problems that we have in our society today. We've got to really do some thinking on how to empower the people in the Black community. How can we do that so that we can be effective in what we do to address systemic racism and that kind of thing? So that's the biggest turn I think that we've taken with our plan with the anti-racism workshop.
And just to add a little bit to that, it actually brought something out in me that I fit into that category. For over 30 years, I worked with coal miners to help them with their Black lung benefits and with their health care. And 99.99% of coal miners in this region are white. But I was very well accepted in this world. If you go throughout the 4 states around here, and even across the country, the western states, you know, they would tell you that Ron Carson is an advocate for coal miners. But in saying that, you know, I sat back and I looked at myself. You know, every day that I walked out this door, I had to put on a different face. And when I say that, I mean, I couldn't really be the Ron Carson that my wife sees or my kids sees or my close friends see. I had to put on a face that I felt that white America wouldn't feel intimidated with. And I think that's a lot of things that Black people, especially in an area that's not diverse that we are living in, we have to adapt to try to fit in this area. So.
And again, I think that holds true, but at different levels, probably everywhere, you know, and reading up and trying to keep ourselves informed. You go back in time and history and you see that when we were brought over here on the slave ships, we felt good about ourselves. We had no reason to not, you know, and but over the course of time, things were put in place and that changed that were oppressive, that, you know, that just put us in a totally different place where, you know, we had to change our names were changed. We were not made to feel good about the color of our skin. We were not made to feel good about the texture of our hair. I mean, these are all oppressive things that we have, that no matter what you think, they take their toll on you over a course of time. And I remember when I was a little kid, us saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Well, they do. I think we've come to that realization that we can be scarred by some of those things. So when we look at the cultural center and the fact that, and we didn't mention that we did have Trayvon and people that are affiliated with other groups throughout the region, in the Bristol area, Johnson City, and we had them here. We were careful about our distancing and our masks and everything, but we had them here. And just to set the tone so that our young Black people could get that feel and the sense of who they are. And I think the role of the Cultural Center becomes even more and more important so that our young people can see that they develop a sense of worth and self-value that historically we've been stripped of, and getting back to that place. And, and talking to Trayvon in particular, and some other people that were here, some other women from the Bristol area, they felt that going into the Cultural Center, and they felt that there's a need to try to restore a sense of value, a sense of who we are, and what Ron quoted from Carter G. Woodson. So I think in the work that we do in order to try to empower Black people in our local communities, we've got to work on that. We've got to work on that to try to get rid of this sense of hopelessness, this sense of I can't. And I think about how we raised our kids. We always, and I don't think we're any different than most Black families, we raise our kids to understand that, what it's like out there and how you have to be better than, and you've got to put on that face that Ron talked about. And that's not real. We've got to be able to instill in our young people the importance of their identity and being proud of who they are. Now, we also found, and I think it's important to note, that in doing this, we found that the Black community, for all intents and purposes in Lee County, has divorced themselves from the greater community. And these are all Ron's family that we're talking about pretty much, that have divorced themselves from the greater community. And Charles, I don't know if you remember this, but the Black community is on the other side of the railroad tracks, and the town in which the majority of Black folks live is referred to as Bucktown. Bucktown. How, disrespectful. But not only did we find that the Black community has divorced themselves from their larger community, but you know what? So have poor people. When I look at people, or when we look at people in the town of St. Charles, for example, in the coal camps, it's kind of the same thing. Where they have divorced themselves, and then makes you think back to Dr. Martin Luther King, and when his whole being was not just Black people, but he also included poor people in his work as well. So we see that too. And
on the flip side of all that Julia said, since the George Floyd incident, we are seeing a lot of white allies who's coming forth and wanting to work with us on this mission. But one thing that I particularly have discovered is that I have a lot of friends over the years who says, Ron, I am not racist. Ron, you are my best friend. Ron this. Went to school with, some Black guys, roommates. But now, it's, in my opinion, it's not good enough to say, a white person to say, I'm not a racist. You got to say, I am anti-racist. And when you say I am anti-racist, you are saying I do not believe in it, and this is what I'm going to do about it. Because you can say I am not a racist, and and you may not be. I mean, that's up to you. You may not be, but if you are with your friends and your white friends tell a racist joke, do you laugh with them or do you don't say nothing? If you say nothing, that's just as bad as laughing with them. You are condoning it. So I'm telling all my white friends, please don't tell me that you are not a racist. I want to hear that you are anti-racist, and this is what I'm doing about it.
And we also believe that you have to meet people where they're at. This is all conditioning on both sides when we talk about oppression and when we talk about white privilege. It's conditioning by our society. So we have to meet people where they're at. But for us right now, the emphasis has got to be placed on empowering the Black community and building Black leadership and talking to people. All too often we think we have all the answers in any kind of situation. We sit down at a table and a few of us and talk about what the issues are and that kind of thing. But it's important that we get out and talk to the community and find out from the community what they see as issues and challenges, and just start bringing people together with like concerns, like issues, all in an attempt to start building some Black leadership. And that spoke volumes to us that we don't have that leadership, and for a lot of different reasons and for a lot of deep rooted reasons. So, our goal is to try to do what we can do to build leadership, to bring young people into the fold. And because I am a firm believer that what we're seeing today is very different than what this issue looked like 6 months ago. I think it's being addressed in a different way. I think we being us, but particularly younger people, can do this, can change this and change it. And we have to it's got to be sustainable also, because a lot of things we do is just like putting on Band-Aids and they just go away. Excuse me.
No,
But
go ahead.
Go on.
I was going to say, I really am appreciative of you guys sharing both the community lens, but your personal lens of everything you've experienced and what you've seen. One thing that, we talk about there's a lot of long overdue conversations going on in communities around Virginia and obviously beyond, about race, about systemic racism, about white fragility, white privilege. So as community leaders and organizers are coming out and trying to do things in their towns, their cities, or counties, what advice do you give those folks? I know you particularly talked about trying to develop leaders in the Black community, but what advice would you give those folks to help them change their communities for the better?
Talking.
Yeah, I have this saying that I came up with is, we must reveal before we can heal. And, as Jill just mentioned, we have to talk about it. It cannot be a taboo subject. I mean, it is so hard for white people to sit down and talk about race. That's been my experience over the past 30 years since the Culture Center. And this is nothing new that Jill and I are doing. We have always welcomed a discussion on race. I mentioned that I lived in Boston for 20 plus years. And Boston is a racist city, but it's a totally different type of racism in Boston compared to what I see in Southwest Virginia. Boston was more of the overt type of racism. Southwest Virginia and the surrounding areas, in my opinion, are covert. It's not the cross burning, although we had one up in Marion, but typically you don't see cross burning. You don't see a lot of racism put in your face. It's that subtle type of racism. And I would give you a perfect example. You go into a grocery store, and not all cashiers, not all, believe me, not all, but this has happened several times over the course of years. You will have 2 or 3 white people in front of you, and the cashier will put the receipt in their hand. And when I get up there, she put the receipt down on the counter on the table. She won't put it in my hand, or he or she, either one. And I said, well, I'm gonna start watching for that. And it has happened on too many occasions for it to be a coincidence. I mentioned that I helped coal miners for over 30 years in their federal Black lung benefits and health care. You know, I've represented a lot of coal miners in administrative law judge hearings. And, you know, I would wear a suit and tie to these hearings, but there are several times that I would get on the elevator or walk past a couple elderly white ladies. They would take their pocketbook off their shoulders and put it on the other side away from me and try to secure it, like I was going to try to take their pocketbook away from them. Those are some of the subtle type of things that I've noticed here in this area. And I believe that it's because that we are so few in numbers that we just pretty much just don't exist. So therefore, you just ride out. And Jill has a story with the school system that I think that she needs to tell that supports what I'm saying.
And this was very typical. And I had mentioned that I did work for the school system and for a number of years, and we were having an event at the center, and I needed to borrow some chairs for that event. And I was going over to talk to the superintendent to see if I could borrow some chairs. And this woman that I worked with, white, she was in my office or something. I said, come on and walk with me because I want to talk to Dr. Bishop. So we go to talk to Dr. Bishop, and I say, we're having this event at the cultural center. I need to borrow some chairs. And he immediately looks at this woman that's with me and says, what are you having at the center? She had no idea. She just happened to walk with me. But it was, you know, that kind, and you see a lot of that. And with Ron, I believe what he's saying is true. It has much to do with an invisibility, as if you don't exist. And when our kids were going through school here, they were, well, they're 4 years apart in age, but they would be one or two of maybe less than 10 kids in the whole Lee County school system of color.
Out of 3,000 plus.
Yeah, and that was an issue because not only did their peers not have much experience with people that didn't look like them, but neither did our teachers, because the majority of the teachers that teach within the school system didn't go very far from home to further their education, and as a result, they didn't have much experience working with children of color, and that too, that hasn't changed much today. And there were, several situations where we had to intervene and had to meet with principals, had to meet with teachers and trying to get them to understand. Well, and early on, I guess it was in maybe the early 90s, where Lee High School put on a halftime show of the Confederacy halftime show at a football game. And the football game happened to be Lee County, Wise County. Wise County had a large Black high school population at the time, and they were at the football game, and they got up and walked out. And it's that lack of sensitivity, and no one can understanding why are you offended by that. So that's an issue that's here. I don't see that as changing much without our bringing things to, it's institutionalized racism, bringing things to the attention of our leadership here. And that is a real challenge. That is a real challenge. And because, who are we offending? The Carsons, and we're not, it's because of that invisibility. Now as I mentioned, we raised 2 kids in a system that is not, funded real well because of how the school funding is determined. Our kids don't have the resources that a lot of other school districts have. But I can honestly say that we have really, developed some or produced some students that have done really well in spite of Black and white that have come out of this area that are doing so well today that we can be very proud of. Our two children, our daughter is a school psychologist. She practiced here in Lee County and recently relocated to Lebanon, to Russell County, where she's a school psychologist there. And she's also a volleyball coach for Southwest Virginia Community College. She was recruited for that. That's why she moved recently. And our son, he left here and went to UVA Charlottesville, where he did his undergrad, and then went on to law school at Rutgers in New Jersey. And today he is chief counsel for Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia. So, and the list goes on with a lot of young people from here. So in spite of our limited resources, we have done well in terms of producing students that have gone out into this world and have become successful in whatever they hope to achieve. But bottom line is it's education, education, education. We seize every opportunity to talk to people. Our goal is to empower the Black community, while at the same time not losing sight of the need for white people to understand what white privilege is and how that works, and how and that's a hard thing for white people to accept, white privilege. And that's our mission right now. We continue to work with these groups that we're working with, and we just have more energy, I think, to move forward and to seek change. But as Ron said, you got to talk about it, but you can't just talk about it and walk away from it and nothing happens. That whole idea of changing this to anti-racism suggests that you're going to take action, whatever that action is. You've got to decide and be committed to taking action to affect the change. It's not going to be for everybody, but hopefully if we can change one thought, one mind, and it's got to come from here too. It's got to come from here as well.
I'm going to talk a little bit about our friend who's an attorney here in this county, a white lady. And she would tell you on the record or wherever she's at that, she is a recovering racist, and that she fights very, very hard every day not to be one. And you have to respect a person who says that, because just the virtue of growing up in this society, the institution that we live in, it's by design. And the white people have these biases that the system has designed. And therefore, in my opinion, only my opinion, when a person say, well, Ron, I'm not racist. Well, in your heart, you may believe that. But with white privilege and all these biases, you are part of it and you play into it. But I want to hear that you recognize this, and this is what I'm going to do about it. And that's why we changed it from dismantling to anti-racism workshops. And as I mentioned earlier, we have a one-day workshop that's pretty much is just an opener for a 2.5-day workshop. And we have these different exercises that we do to bring out more awareness of everyday biases that people don't realize that they are biases. And but one thing that Jill has really talked about, and I appreciate it, is that our work is going to have to be a lot more on the internalized Black oppression, because I really, really didn't realize how oppressed Black people are in this country, including myself. And that just needs to be looked into a whole lot deeper. And that's what I'm committing my time now is learning more about internalized Black oppression.
Well, I really want to thank you guys for taking time to chat with me today. This has been extraordinarily insightful. And I'm also genuinely appreciative of you, again, talking about your professional backgrounds and what you've done in the community, but also the personal lens of, again, of what you've looked at things, growing up in Southwest Virginia, returning to Southwest Virginia, and things you've experienced. And I think a lot of our community leaders throughout the Commonwealth, no matter what city, town, or county they're in, will find some helpful insights as well. So thank you again for taking the time to talk with me today. Appreciate it a lot.
Thank you. Thank you so much.